Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
As the manager of Dead and Roasted, I'm proud to extend a military special to our currently or formerly serving brothers and sisters. That's right, if you are in or were in the military, I'm gonna let Howard the Werewolf shed some hair in your coffee. Werewolf transfer rules are kind of like all-for-one powers in real life. Welcome back, my friends. Today's set of stories features a terrifying reason why hanging out with a coworker after your shift might be the gravest mistake you'll ever make. A disturbing military story of what really goes down at Camp Pendleton, and more. Before we start, spit that mocha out your mouth and follow and review Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Support us and get extra members-only content by signing up at eeriecast.com/plus. These are Tales from the Break Room. I spent the night with a coworker. Never again. From Leopold. I was around 21 or 22 years old, living at home with my parents and younger brother. One of those transitional phases in my life. I was working a part-time job at a local warehouse, trying to save enough money to eventually move out on my own. I was still taking a couple of classes at the community college, mostly night classes, and I was tired of living under my parents' roof with all their rules and drama. I wanted some privacy. I had a few close friends, but most of them lived too far away or had different schedules, so I didn't hang out with them as often as I wanted to. Work was the one place I saw people regularly, even if it wasn't exactly the most thrilling environment. At that warehouse, they had me on random shifts, sometimes early mornings, sometimes late afternoons. They also employed a bunch of guys around my age, mostly doing grunt work like stocking shelves, packing boxes, and loading trucks. One of these guys stood out because he was extremely quiet and awkward. I'll call him Eric. Eric didn't talk much initially, but I'd see him around the break room, always sitting alone, nursing a soda or picking at a sandwich by himself. He didn't really make eye contact with anyone, and if someone tried to chat him up, he'd give short, mumbled answers. A few of the other guys teased him, but mostly they just ignored him. I felt bad for the guy. Really. I know what it's like to feel out of place. For a couple of weeks, I made it a point to at least say hi or offer a quick comment about work. Sometimes he'd nod, sometimes he'd mutter a one-word reply. Eventually, I started to sit at the same table in the break room, just to be near him, see if I could get him to talk. One day he was staring at his phone with this sort of lost expression, and I asked if he was okay. Surprisingly, he actually opened up a bit, telling me his phone was messing up, or something trivial like that. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next week, I found reasons to walk with him to the parking lot after shifts, or to share a smoke break out by the dumpsters. Little by little, he seemed more comfortable around me. We weren't best friends or anything, but we were getting there. Eric had a subtle sense of humor, real dry, and every now and then he'd crack a joke that actually made me laugh out loud. The strangest thing was that he wouldn't make any plans with me outside of work. I'd say, "Hey, let's grab a burger after our shift," and he'd always have an excuse. Finally, he admitted he lived kinda far out, that he didn't feel like going into town more than he needed to. One afternoon, I complained about my living situation. My parents fighting, my brother blasting music until 3 a.m., and I told Eric I didn't really have a comfortable place to bring anybody back to. That's when I suggested we hang out at his place instead. He got real quiet, and sort of shrugged, as if he was torn. But I guess he could tell I was desperate for a change of scenery. A day or two later, he texted me his address. The place was way out in the sticks. I mean, the direction seemed straightforward, but once I got off the main highway and onto the secluded paved road, I realized how empty that area was. No streetlights, no neighbors in sight, barely any traffic. After driving maybe 5 or 6 miles, I found this narrow dirt road off to the side that looked more like a driveway There was a small wooden sign with the same road name Eric had texted me. I turned onto it. It was a rough, bumpy path that stretched for about 2 miles, until I finally reached a small clearing. Eric's house was a modest, single-story place that had clearly been there for quite a long time. I parked my old sedan in what looked like an improvised parking spot, just flattened grass and dirt in front of the porch. The moment I killed the engine and opened my car door, I heard Eric shouting from the porch, "Run! Hurry, man, get in here!" He sounded scared out of his mind, like something was chasing me, so I didn't even stop to question it. My adrenaline kicked in, and I sprinted to the front door, heart pounding. It felt like some surreal horror movie moment. Once inside, I slammed the door behind me and stood there, breathing hard, asking him what in the world that was about. He was peering through a gap in the thick curtains, like he was checking if we'd been followed. After a second, he let out a shaky sigh and told me, "You got here earlier than I thought. I wasn't prepared." He wouldn't explain what that meant, and I was too freaked out to push the issue. We tried to settle down. Eric's living room was small and cluttered. There were blankets covering the windows, and a weird smell, kind of like incense or some kind of herbal stuff. I saw that he was just as on edge as I was, his eyes darting from window to window. He offered to smoke up to take the edge off, and we did. For a while, it helped. We chatted about random stuff like video games, old TV shows we both liked. I asked him about living out here and how far he had to drive to work every day. He said by now he was used to it, and he liked being isolated out here. But there was always this nervous look in his eyes. Every now and then, he'd glance at the front door like he was expecting someone to try to break it down. By around 9 o'clock, we'd been hanging out for a couple of hours. We got hungry, so we threw together some microwave meals he had in the freezer. He wasn't exactly stocked up on groceries. We finished eating, then put on some random action movie. And honestly, I was almost comfortable. But then it happened. The loudest banging I'd ever heard. 3 thunder-like knocks on the front door, spaced just enough apart to sound intentional. The whole door rattled in its frame. My heart leapt into my throat, and I blurted out something like, "Dude, you better get that. Sounds like somebody really needs you." But Eric's face had gone completely pale. He looked like he was about to pass out. He kept his voice low, staring at me with wide eyes, whispering, "You're not supposed to be here." At first, I was offended, thinking he was saying I wasn't welcome in his home. So I asked if he wanted me to leave. But he quickly grabbed my arm and said, "No, don't. If you go out there before sunrise, something very bad might happen. You can't leave right now." I remember my stomach twisting into knots when he said that. Everything in his tone told me he truly believed it. My mind was racing, trying to figure out if this was some sort of insane prank, or if Eric was dealing with serious mental issues. Then the knocks came again. 3 more, spaced out, so strong I thought the door was about to split in 2. Eric put a finger to his lips to shush me. I stood there in total silence, too scared to even move. We turned off the lights, sitting there in the dark for a long time, hardly even breathing. The knocking didn't repeat right away. Eventually, Eric tugged me by the arm again, leading me to his bedroom, which was just as cluttered as the living room. Papers and clothes, weird talisman-looking things hanging on the walls. He seemed resigned to the situation and quietly said we needed to wait it out till morning. "I doubt we'll get any real sleep," he said. But then again, he looked more exhausted than scared, like he had gone through this routine many times before. I asked him what that was outside, but he shook his head, telling me that I wouldn't believe him. I remember a feeling of anger mixed with fear. Part of me wanted to yell at him for dragging me into this nightmare, but I couldn't bring myself to speak too loud or even get near the front door. Every hour, like clockwork, came those 3 knocks. It was so exact, it felt impossible for a human to time it that perfectly. Each time it happened, I nearly jumped out of my skin. After the 3rd or 4th occurrence, Eric seemed to calm down a little, like it was old news to him. But I was on edge. Around 3 a.m., Eric actually dozed off. Meanwhile, I was wide awake, sweating even though it was cold. 1,000 questions were bouncing around in my head. Who or what was knocking? Could it be some local crazy person? An animal? Why did Eric not even want to try to investigate what it was? Could it be a prank by somebody Eric knew? It didn't make sense to me. And finally, curiosity won me over. With Eric asleep, I decided to go to the window next to the front door. I moved super slow, practically tiptoeing, trying not to make a sound on the creaky floorboards. The curtains there were heavy and dark, blocking out any hint of moonlight. In the darkness, my eyes had adjusted a bit, so I could at least see shapes and outlines. I waited for the next set of knocks, determined to peek through the curtain to see who or what was out there. I stood there for several minutes. Then it came. 3 ear-splitting bangs. Immediately, I yanked the curtain aside and pressed my face to the glass, trying to get a glimpse. I wish I hadn't. The first thing I saw was a face shoved right up against the glass on the other side. Pale skin, like it hadn't seen sun in years. 2 slitted eyes, more like a cat's, but the irises were a dark, almost rust-colored orange, and the mouth was twisted into this awful grin. I'll never forget that grin for as long as I live. It wasn't right. It was too wide, too unnatural. I screamed then, my mind going blank. I stumbled backward, letting the curtain fall back into place. Outside, I heard what I could only describe as laughter. A hoarse, rasping laugh that wasn't quite human. Terrified out of my skull, I ran back to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. Eric was already awake, eyes wide open. He just shook his head at me. In a hushed voice, he said to me, "I told you, you're not supposed to be here." I didn't even have words for that. I just stood there, shaking from head to toe, like I'd walked in on some cosmic nightmare I wasn't supposed to see. After that, we sat there in complete silence. I noticed he had a small collection of candles in the corner. Some of them were half melted. He must have lit them on previous nights, maybe as some sort of weird warding ritual. I didn't ask, though. I didn't want to know at that point. I just kept thinking about how I was going to get out of there. How, if I ran outside, that thing might be waiting for me. Eventually, the knocks stopped coming. Maybe around 5 in the morning, there was no next set of 3 knocks. Everything was finally, eerily quiet. Eric managed to fall asleep again, and I was left sitting there, listening to my own heartbeat. When I noticed the sky starting to get lighter through the gaps in the curtains, relief washed over me. I knew I wasn't staying another second in that house. As soon as there was enough light to confirm it was day, I made my move. I slipped on my shoes, grabbed my jacket, and tiptoed out to the living room. The front door seemed like the gateway to hell, but I had no other choice. I counted to 3, flung it open, and bolted for my car. I'm pretty sure I set some kind of personal record for the fastest I've ever run. The morning light was weak, but it was enough to see where I was going. When I got to my car and started it, I glanced in the rearview mirror. That's when I saw Eric standing in the open doorway, watching me. He wasn't waving or yelling. He just had this heartbreaking, sad look on his face, as if he knew this was the last time we'd see each other. And he was right, because I had zero intention of ever coming back here. I blasted down that dirt road, ignoring the potholes and bumps that nearly wrecked my car's suspension. Once I hit the pavement, I drove even faster until I got to the main highway. The whole time I kept checking my mirrors. When I finally got home, it was still early in the morning. My parents and brother were asleep, so I just went straight to my room and locked the door. But I didn't go back to bed. I kept thinking about how Eric lived with this, possibly every night, and what it was exactly that had singled him out. Later that afternoon, I forced myself to go to work. I needed the hours, and also because I had to see if Eric was there. Eric didn't come back. That day came and went. The next day, the same thing. Eric never showed. After a week, management said that he had quit. No call, no show. I got a new coworker assigned to my section. I had Eric's number, but when I tried to call or message him, I got no reply. Any other contact info was in the official HR database, and they weren't going to give that out. It's been years, and I still haven't heard from Eric. I don't even know if he's still at that house, or if he left it for good. Sometimes I wonder if I should have tried harder to help him, but it's not like I knew where to even start. I rarely tell anyone the details of that night. It sounds insane, right? And I'm sure some people would think I was high or dreaming or exaggerating. But I remember every moment like it happened yesterday, especially frantically running away from that house like I was about to die. I still get uneasy when I drive on empty roads at night, especially out there in the countryside. Every time I see a dirt road branching off from the main road, I start to wonder. Eric, if you're out there listening to this, I still consider you a friend, and I hope to hear from you one day. I hope you're doing okay. Our Haunted Post Office. From The Deliverer. I work at our small town's post office. I'm 32 years old, and I've been here for about 7 years or so. I'm married and a father of 2 boys. Until a few months ago, I was the guy who didn't believe in ghost stories. To me, they were things people used to get attention. But now, I've changed my mind, and I'll tell you why. There were experiences I had at work that I simply could not chalk up to coincidence or exhaustion. These were stories I would not believe from someone else, but they happened to me directly. Our little post office sits near the edge of town. It's an old brick building, probably built back in the 1920s or 1930s. The windows are high up, the kind that let in a bit of light, but not enough to tell if the sky is sunny or cloudy. Inside, the paint is dingy, off-white, with water stains in the corners. We don't have a big staff. It's just me and 2 other clerks, and a postmaster who mostly stays in her office. Our hours are short compared to city offices. We're open 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. on weekdays, with a half day on Saturdays. It's not unusual for me to be the one closing up if someone else needs to leave early, or if I'm covering a shift alone. That's when it all started. Closing time near dark, the day winding down and nobody else around. First incident. This happened just after we got past holiday rush recently, so the post office was quieter than normal. Around 3:45 p.m., I was finishing up with the last customer when the other clerk, Ray, asked if I could close alone because he had to pick up his daughter from school. It wasn't a big deal, so I told him to go on ahead. Usually closing by myself just means I have to lock the doors, finish some paperwork, and make sure all the mail is sorted for the next morning pickup. Takes about 15 or 20 minutes. That day I found myself alone with no noise, except for the sort of buzz the fluorescent lights make. The building felt still. I decided I'd do a quick round to make sure all the back doors were locked. After verifying the loading dock door was secured, I turned off the light in the sorting area. That's when I swear I began to hear footsteps. Very faint but distinct. It was coming from near the P.O. boxes, the public area. My first thought was that maybe a customer snuck in, or that Ray forgot to lock the front door on his way out. But I glanced at the large windows and could see the blinds were down, meaning I had already pulled them down as part of the closing routine. Even so, I went to check. The door was locked, and nobody was there. But while I was standing in the lobby, I heard the footsteps again, this time behind me. I spun around and saw nothing. Just rows of P.O. boxes. I took a big breath in and reminded myself it was an old building. Maybe the vents or pipes were making noises. I locked up and went home. That night, though, I kept thinking about how distinct those footfalls sounded, like someone was wearing heavy shoes. Second incident. The second incident happened about a couple weeks later, and it was worse. We'd been having issues with the old wiring in the building. Lights would flicker or phone lines would just cut out. Our postmaster asked me to stay late with a repairman who was supposed to check the fuse box in the back. The repairman finished around 5 p.m. and left, but I decided to stay for another half hour, just to get a jump on sorting parcels for the next day. It was a quiet evening, no other staff around, and I'd already locked the front door. I was in the sorting area, scanning packages, when the overhead lights started to flicker. Normally, I would just chalk it up to more faulty wiring, but these flickers had a rhythm to them. I noticed it after about 30 seconds. It would go dark for a second, then flicker twice quickly, then dark again. That pattern would continue over and over. It made me nervous, so I walked to the breaker panel, thinking maybe something was loose. Before I got there, I heard a loud crash from behind me. Quickly, I whirled around and saw that an entire shelf of sorting bins had been toppled over. Those bins are heavy plastic, and they were filled with mail. It's not something that just tips over by itself. You would have to physically ram into it. I walked over carefully, thinking maybe the bracket had given way. But the metal brackets on the wall were intact, not even bent. It looked like the shelf had been yanked forward, but that couldn't be, I thought. I was alone in here, right? My skin started to crawl. Then the lights went out completely. I was plunged into darkness, with only the glow of the exit sign nearby. My first instinct was to hightail it out of there, but I forced myself to stay calm. I pulled out my phone for light, planning to head back to the breaker panel. As soon as I turned on my phone's flashlight, I caught sight of movement to my left. Something black and fast disappeared behind a row of mail carts. I couldn't figure out what I'd just seen. It wasn't just a shadow cast by my phone, because it was moving independently. It had a sort of shape, but it was gone too quickly for me to fully register. And then I felt something cold sweep past me, like a gust of icy wind, but the air in the building was still. There were no fans, and the AC was not blowing at the time. I knew I had to get out. I slammed the side door behind me and locked it, as if that would keep whatever was inside from following me. Needless to say, I skipped finishing the mail sorting that night. Third incident. This third incident is the one that convinced me it wasn't just a series of odd occurrences, but instead was something demonic, or at the very least something that felt evil. It was late again. This time I wasn't alone. My coworker, I'll call her Dina for this story, volunteered to help me finish up a bulk mailing job for a local business that had hundreds of identical letters needing sorting. This was only about a week ago, mind you, just after closing on a Friday evening. We figured we'd knock it out in an hour and then enjoy the weekend. We were standing at the sorting table in the back, chatting about her kids and my sons, laughing about how small-town life can be both comforting and sometimes suffocating. The environment felt normal, cozy even. No flickering lights or strange noises, just the two of us getting along and working. Suddenly, Dina froze mid-sentence, staring past me at something over my shoulder. I felt a chill then. When I turned around, there was a tall black figure standing near the door to the loading dock. It looked like the silhouette of a very tall person. But there was no detail, just solid blackness in the shape of a human. It had to be about 6 feet tall, if not more. Honestly, maybe closer to 7. I remember thinking it didn't look like a man wearing black clothes, it just looked like the absence of light in the shape of a man. Dina screamed, and the figure darted to the side, disappearing behind some stacked boxes. I felt goosebumps all over every inch of my body. We ran toward the front, intending to leave through the lobby, but the front door was still locked. Dina got her keys out, trying to find the right one. While she did that, I turned to look over my shoulder, and I heard a deep growl, like there was a large animal trapped in the building with us. It sounded angry, full of hate. I don't know how else to describe it, but the sound made my stomach turn. Finally, Dina got the door unlocked, and we burst outside. The sun had just set, so it was that murky twilight where everything is gray. We ran to our cars and jumped in, driving all the way home. The next morning, we had to explain to our postmaster why we left the building unlocked. Dina and I agreed we'd seen the exact same thing. We together described it as a tall black shape with no face, and she said she felt sick the moment she locked eyes with it, like it was draining her. That was a very long weekend afterward. I was very on edge, very creeped out. Reminded me of how I saw a tarantula documentary when I was a kid, and it gave me the creepy crawlies for the next few days, but scale that on up to a demonic adult version. My wife noticed that something was wrong with me. I couldn't explain it to her right away, afraid she would think I lost my mind. Dina called me later that Sunday, saying that she was turning in her 2 weeks' notice. She asked if I thought the building was haunted, and I told her I thought it was something more than a ghost, something dark. She agreed with me, but refused to set foot in that place again, and despite her 2 weeks' notice, she wasn't there Monday morning. I'm still at the post office, mostly because I need the paycheck and benefits from my family. But I started to carry a small cross in my pocket, saying a quiet prayer before unlocking the doors each morning. So far, it's been pretty quiet, but I have noticed some smaller things. Once I heard a scratching sound on the wall, and at another point recently, I smelled sulfur in the back room. There are the occasional cold spots throughout the building, especially near the loading dock, even when the heater's on. I told another coworker, Ray, about it, but he shook his head at me, saying the building is probably settling, or that we have critters in the walls. So far, nobody else has seen what Dina and I had seen. Before I go, I'll say this. If you're hearing this and you're skeptical like I was, I totally get it. I used to be too. But after watching a shelf tear itself off the wall and a pitch-black figure with my own eyes, I think there's more at work here in this world. And sometimes that stuff is evil. Something in the parking lot with me. From Davey M. I work at a local Walmart. I'm a part-time associate in the electronics department. But with Walmart, you end up doing a lot of everything, from stocking shelves to helping with the registers. Just whatever they need you to do. Walmart isn't as bad as people say, but it's still pretty boring. I'm just here until I finish community college. I usually work the evening shift from about 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., sometimes later if there's a rush. It was about mid-December, a bitter cold night. We'd just had a pretty heavy snowfall earlier in the day. By the time my break rolled around, it was about 8 p.m., a very late break. The parking lot was mostly empty and covered in a fresh blanket of snow. We hardly had any customers inside, maybe just a few last-minute shoppers, stocking up on groceries or holiday items. The wind was picking up, blowing snow around in drifts. Even just standing inside near the automatic doors, you could feel the chill. My break was 30 minutes, so I decided to step outside for some air. I'd been on my feet all day, and sometimes just getting into my car and sitting in relative quiet is the only way I can relax. I grabbed a bag of chips and a soda from the break room vending machine and headed out to my car. Nothing fancy, an older model Honda Civic with a few dents and more than 100,000 miles on it. But to me, it was a private place to unwind, and the heater, for some reason, worked like a charm. The night was unusually calm and quiet as I walked across the lot. I remember noticing how few cars were parked. Our store has a lot that can probably fit 500 vehicles, but I saw maybe 15 total, including employees' cars. The parking lot lights illuminated the snow, giving everything a dull blue-white glow. As I trudged through the snowy rows, I could hear the crunch under my boots. My breath was visible, and my face stung from the cold wind. Finally, I reached my Civic, parked about 4 rows away from the entrance, because that's where I'd found a spot earlier in the afternoon. No one else was anywhere near me. I got inside, turned on the engine for the heat, and opened my soda. For the first few minutes, I just scrolled through my phone, checking messages. Occasionally, I would glance up at the empty lot, thinking I would see someone heading into the store at the last minute, but nobody came. After about 10 minutes, I heard something. There was a light tapping sound. It was soft at first, and I thought I had imagined it. It was coming from somewhere on the passenger side of my car, near the front door or maybe the fender. I glanced around but couldn't see anything through the windows, except swirling snow. The tapping lasted maybe 3 or 4 seconds and then stopped. I told myself it was probably a piece of ice or snow falling off a lamppost. Shaking my head, I went back to my phone, but I couldn't fully concentrate. There's something unnerving about a random noise outside your car when you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the lot is basically deserted. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing, and I tried to relax again. Not even 5 minutes later, I heard the tapping again, this time on the driver's side door, right by my left shoulder. It wasn't aggressive, but it was clearly someone lightly rapping on the metal. It made me jump. I rolled the window down just a crack, peering through the side mirror, but I saw nothing. It was definitely weird enough that I decided to check it out. I killed the engine, grabbed my coat, and stepped outside. The cold hit me again, and the quiet seemed even deeper than before. Looking down, I found footprints leading from the store. Those were mine. Beyond that, there was otherwise untouched snow around my car. Nobody else's footprints around my vehicle. There was no sign that I was anything but alone. I crouched down to look under the car. Maybe it was a cat or other animal, and they'd hid under there to get some warmth. But there was nothing. Just slush and a few small icicles hanging from the undercarriage. I did a full circle around the car, checking the windows, hood, trunk. Everything looked normal. I stood there for a minute, straining my ears for any sound besides the wind, but there was nothing. I was a tad bit creeped out, but I mostly felt silly, so I got back in the car. I decided I'd just finish my break inside the store next time if anything else weird happened. I turned on the car again, blasting the heat, trying to calm down by scrolling through social media. Maybe 3 or 4 minutes went by. My nerves had begun to settle. But then, a third tap came. This time it seemed to come from behind me, like on the trunk or maybe the rear door. Once more I jumped, and I cursed. This time, though, part of me did not want to go outside again. But that primal fight or flight instinct kicked in. I figured if someone was messing with me, I wanted to catch them in the act, so I quickly yanked the key out of the ignition and threw open the door. The gust of wind nearly knocked my hat off. I marched around to the back of the car with more confidence than I actually felt, scanning the area for footprints. Nothing. The snow around the trunk was smooth, except for the tracks I'd left earlier when I checked. That was impossible. If something had touched my vehicle to tap on it, it would have shown in the snow. I lowered myself again to check under the car. Something caught my eye. There was something different than before. In the light reflecting off the snowy ground, there was a dark spot on the pavement in the center of the undercarriage. I stared at it, thinking maybe it was a puddle of melted snow that had formed from me running the car. But it didn't look liquid. It looked more like a shadow. An oddly shaped shadow that didn't match any of the car's angles. I realized I hadn't seen it before when I'd first looked. My mind was racing. Was I sure it hadn't been there earlier? Had I missed it? As I bent down lower and got a closer look, the shadow suddenly shifted. And when it did, I swear I saw two eyes open up. I know how bizarre that sounds, but I'm telling you, two eyes blinked open. I gasped and stumbled backward, landing on my rear in the snow. My chest felt like it was going to burst, and I scrambled to my feet as quickly as I could. The eyes were still there, unblinking and watching me. I bolted back into my car. I slammed the door and locked it, all in what felt like half a second. My hands were shaking. For a few moments, I was just trying to catch my breath. I wondered if I should drive away, but I was technically still on the clock. Well, I was supposed to clock back in after my break. A Walmart parking lot felt like the weirdest place for anything supernatural or unknown. But there I was, sure that something was definitely wrong out there. I waited for another tap or sign that that thing was going to crawl out from under my car. But there was nothing. In fact, everything got too quiet, as if the wind had died down. The clock on my dashboard said I was already 5 minutes late getting back from break. My manager had been on my case recently about punctuality, so I was torn. Do I risk my job, or do I risk going out there again? Then I heard a different sound. It came from inside my car. A long, drawn-out breath coming from the back seat. It was slow. Whatever was back there wanted me to know it was there. I almost dropped my keys again. My mind was screaming at me not to look in the rear view, and luckily I was too scared to do so. All rational thought I had left was telling me to run. So I braced myself, counted to 3 in my head, and grabbed the door handle, shoving it open. The moment I was out, I slammed the door shut behind me and sprinted to the store's entrance. I didn't even bother looking back. I focused on running, nearly slipping near the curb, but I steadied myself and kept going until I made it through those sliding doors. Once inside, I almost collided with an older lady who was heading out with her bags. She gave me an odd look, likely because I was breathing so hard. But I couldn't focus on anything except how grateful I was to be back under these lights and around other people. I marched straight to the back of the store, punching in my code to clock back in. By then, I was about 10 minutes late. My supervisor, Laura, spotted me, and she was not happy, asking if I had lost track of time and telling me this was the second time that week I'd been late returning from break. I tried to tell her something odd had happened to me in the parking lot, but the minute I started to describe the noise, the tapping, the shadow, she sighed at me. She clearly thought I was making it up or overreacting. Without letting me finish, she told me to go back to the electronics area and that she'd have to write me up for being late again. My shift ended at 10:30 p.m. that night. Normally, I'd walk back out to my car and head home like usual, but I was dreading it this time. When my last customer left, I lingered in the store for a while, restocking shelves just so I didn't have to face the parking lot. Eventually, the manager on duty said we were closing soon, and that I couldn't just hang around forever milking the clock. Walking out to the car, I looked around again, trying to find any footprints around my vehicle. I checked underneath, but the shadow was gone. So far, everything appeared normal. I jumped inside and started the engine, backing out of my spot. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, over and over, but all I saw was my empty back seat, and I heard nothing but silence in the vehicle. Ever since this happened to me, I stopped going out to my car during break. I don't know what this experience was or what it was about, but it kind of stole my peaceful car break time from me. It's unfortunate, but I'd rather stay inside where it's warm and not filled with ghosts or whatever. I enlisted in the Marine Corps straight out of high school, looking for discipline, a sense of purpose, and maybe a bit of adventure. I got stationed out in California. Just my luck, right? Lots of people imagine sunny beaches and palm trees, but a lot of our training areas are nothing but deserts, barren hills, and scrubland. My unit spent a good chunk of time rotating between different field exercises across the state. Some were near Camp Pendleton, others out in more remote training grounds that felt like they were in the middle of nowhere. This story takes place about a year and a half into my service, during a time we were doing a mix of overnight patrols, mock ambushes, and other field drills in some rocky desert terrain. We'd been hearing jokes about a so-called goblin since I first arrived. At first, I assumed it was some made-up creature to spook the newbies, like you might hear about Bigfoot or the chupacabra in certain places. Guys would say, "Watch out, the goblin will snatch your MRE if you leave it out," or "Don't wander off alone or the goblin might follow you back." I laughed like everyone else, figuring it was just a tradition of messing with the fresh faces. But I slowly realized that most of these jokes came from people who claimed they'd actually seen something. And the more time I spent out in the boonies, the more I picked up on the fact that nobody was calling it a coyote or a wild dog or any normal desert critter. They all insisted it wasn't an animal they recognized. We'd go out on multi-day exercises, carrying full packs, sleeping in small squads, setting up observation posts, that kind of thing. Those of us who heard rustling around at night usually chalked it up to raccoons, foxes, or other wildlife sniffing for scraps. But every so often, someone would claim they got a good look at a short, bipedal figure with spindly limbs, darting away with an MRE packet or rummaging through gear. They called it the goblin in a half-joking, half-serious way. The first time I ever heard a direct story was from a corporal in my squad named Torres. We were crouched around a little makeshift fire well after the official training schedule had ended for the day, discussing weird encounters. Torres told me he'd once set his gear down outside his hooch in the early evening and stepped away to handle some personal business. When he came back, he saw a shape crouched near his pack. Initially, he thought it was one of our guys, but the figure was so short that it had to be either a kid or something else entirely. He tried to call out, but the thing scampered away on two legs, hunched over, holding something from his pack. By the time Torres gave chase, the thing vanished behind a rock formation. He never got more than a glimpse. He described it as maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, with an awkward posture, and pale, almost grayish skin, or fur. He couldn't tell in the dim light. I listened with polite skepticism. People see weird shadows in the desert all the time. Maybe it was a small coyote jumping up on its hind legs, or maybe a desert fox. Regardless, the story was so widespread around the unit that it got me curious. Almost everyone I talked to had a cousin or a friend in another platoon who had a run-in with the goblin. It was like a local myth, but told with that edge of sincerity that hinted at a real phenomenon. First odd sighting. My own first brush with something unusual happened during an evening patrol. We were doing a recon exercise, basically hiking along a trail at dusk before setting up in a perimeter. I was assigned to carry extra radio batteries, so my pack was a bit heavier than usual. That meant I fell a bit behind the main group from time to time, but I was close enough that it wasn't an issue. At one point, we stopped to rest. The sun had just set, and the temperature was dropping. I was sipping water when I thought I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head and saw what I assumed at first was a desert hare or a stray cat behind a cluster of rocks. It was small, maybe knee-height, and it moved quick. I pointed it out to my buddy Nichols, but by the time he looked, it was gone. He shrugged and said, "Probably just the goblin, man," flashing a grin. Everybody else chuckled, but I felt a little twinge of unease. Whatever I saw definitely looked like it was on two legs for a split second before it ducked out of sight. But I told myself I was imagining it. No reason to freak out over something so trivial. Second odd sighting. Over the next few weeks, I'd hear plenty of references to the goblin. Guys would mention missing gear that was left out at night, anything from socks to random rations. Sometimes packs looked rummaged through, though that could just be a raccoon or a hungry coyote. But in a desert environment, it seemed less likely for raccoons to be so persistent, and usually coyotes scatter if they sense humans. Still, I tried not to dwell on it. My second real sighting occurred during a nighttime land nav exercise, land navigation, where we had to find marked points using a map and compass. My squad split into pairs. I was teamed with Nichols, and we were taking turns reading the map. It was about 2 a.m. on a moonlit night. Honestly, it was a beautiful view. Clear sky, stars everywhere. The only problem was how easy it is to get turned around in that terrain, especially at night. We'd just found one of our checkpoints, a small reflective marker on a wooden stake, and were heading toward the next. Suddenly, Nichols grabbed my arm. He said low, "Look." He pointed off to our left, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, at a shape crouching behind a small bush. My eyes adjusted, and I caught sight of something definitely not the shape of a normal desert animal. It was small, maybe the size of a large dog, but upright, crouched like a person might while trying to stay hidden. We froze. It was looking right at us. I could tell because I could see the faint reflection of its eyes in the moonlight. I'd love to say I stayed totally cool, but I felt a surge of adrenaline, like I was about to face something beyond explanation. Nichols made a slight motion like he was going to head that way, and the thing bolted. Fast. It took off across the desert, weaving between rocks, and within seconds, it disappeared behind a ridge. Nichols turned to me and just said, "That was definitely not a coyote." We decided to mark it on our map as possible contact, just for a laugh, but we never told our command about it. What would we say? That we saw a little desert goblin running around? We got back to base camp around 4 a.m. and told a couple of the guys what happened. Of course, they said it must have been the goblin. Some of them were excited, wanting details, while others just joked about it, saying we must have been delirious from lack of sleep. Final and creepiest encounter. About 2 weeks after that, my squad went on a longer field exercise, 5 nights out in the rough, simulating an extended mission. We had standard supplies: tents, sleeping bags, MREs, water, the usual gear. During the day, we ran drills, practiced squad movements, all the typical stuff. At night, we set up a perimeter and took turns on watch. The desert can be unforgiving at night. Cold, windy, and sometimes too quiet for comfort. On the final night out, we were pretty beat. Most of us were trying to get a few hours of rest before an early wake-up at 0400. I was in a small 2-person tent with Nichols. Another couple guys, Watson and Rivera, were in a tent just a few feet away. Everyone else was scattered in pairs around our little site, though still within earshot if we yelled. We didn't build a fire because that would give away our position in a real scenario. So it was pitch black, except for our flashlights, which we kept off to preserve batteries and night vision. I woke up around 1 a.m. to what I thought was someone rummaging outside. I figured maybe one of our guys got up to relieve himself or to grab something from a pack. But the sound persisted. It was like a faint rustling, punctuated by little scraping noises against the canvas of the tent. Nichols was out cold, snoring lightly. I lay there, straining my ears, trying to decide if I should unzip the tent and check. At the same time, I didn't want to jump at shadows, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was right outside. Then the scraping sound came again, more distinct this time, like small fingers or claws running across the material of the tent. I slowly reached for my flashlight. Right then, the tent's side bulged inward slightly, as if someone pushed on it from outside. It didn't look like a handprint, more like a small shape pressing. I nearly gasped, and Nichols woke up, blinking in confusion. I motioned for him to be quiet, pointing to the part of the tent that was bulging. He mouthed, "What the hell?" I shrugged, mouth dry, not sure what to do. Just then, the bulge pulled back, and a shadow darted away from the tent. We heard rapid footsteps on the rocky ground. Nichols fumbled for his rifle, unloaded but with blank rounds. We were in a training scenario after all, and unzipped the tent in a hurry. We poked our heads out, flashlights scanning across the desert floor. My beam caught a glimpse of something scurrying behind Watson and Rivera's tent, a small, hunched figure. It had a gaunt, almost lanky shape. The flashlight glare made its eyes shine eerily. It looked at us, let out this weird hiss, then took off into the darkness. Watson and Rivera were already awake, unzipping their tent, shouting, "What was that?" But by the time we all got out to investigate, the thing had vanished over a small rise in the terrain. We decided to do a quick sweep around the camp. A couple of other guys joined in, all of us on edge, armed with flashlights. We found footprints. Tiny human-like footprints in the dirt, not much bigger than a child's. Some led to where we kept a small stash of rations. Sure enough, one of the MREs was missing, and a couple others had been pulled out, their packaging torn. The footprints disappeared into some rocky outcroppings near our site. We weren't about to go blindly exploring those in the dark, so we retreated back to the tents. Everyone was wide awake, adrenaline surging, exchanging nervous jokes like, "I guess the goblin got hungry," or "We should have left out a meal for the little guy." But beneath the humor, there was a tension. We'd all seen it, or at least glimpsed it. This wasn't just a desert fox or a raccoon. It stood upright, had elongated limbs, and moved faster than anything I've ever seen on 2 legs at that size. We spent the rest of the night on high alert. We didn't break camp because we were still under orders to stay until dawn, but nobody got much sleep. Every rustle of wind through the bushes made me jump. It's hard to describe the creepiness factor. Knowing something so bizarre, so seemingly intelligent, had just tried to raid our camp. The morning came, and we did one last look around in daylight. Other than those footprints and the scattered ration wrappers, there was no sign of the creature. When we regrouped and told our staff sergeant what happened, he just snorted and said, "Oh, you guys met the goblin, huh? You're not the first." He tried to play it off like a joke, but the way he said it made me think he believed it too, like he'd heard these kinds of stories for years. We wrapped up our exercise, and once we were back on base, the tale spread through the company. People asked for details, wanting to know how close we got, what the creature smelled like. Truthfully, we didn't catch a scent, and whether it made any noises besides that weird hiss. Some folks insisted it must be an escaped monkey or some mutated desert animal. Others swore there were cryptids or legends of small humanoid creatures in the region. Most folks just laughed it off as the typical tall tales that flourish in military circles. Me, I know what I saw. I can still picture those strange, reflective eyes glinting in my flashlight, and that bizarre silhouette darting away on two legs. And I'm not the only one. Everyone in my squad that night saw something. We still call it a goblin, for lack of a better term, though who knows what it really is. After that final encounter, I admit I started keeping my gear well secured, especially in the field. I never wanted to wake up to those claw-like fingers tapping on my tent again. It's been a couple of years now, and I've rotated to another unit. I'll occasionally swap stories with old buddies about our time in the California deserts, and the goblin always comes up. They'll joke about how it's probably out there, subsisting on leftover MREs and scaring new recruits. But behind the jokes, we all share the same uneasy memory. There's something out there in those wide open spaces, something small, cunning, and definitely not afraid to get close when it thinks you're not paying attention. Whether it's an animal that looks bizarre under certain conditions, or something else entirely, I can't say for sure. All I know is, if you're ever camping or training in the Californian desert, and you hear rustling or see tiny footprints around your tent, keep an eye out. You just might run into the same goblin we did. And trust me, it's no campfire story when you wake up to find it sniffing around your gear in the middle of the night. That brings us to the end of this Tales from the Break Room episode. Before I go, riddle me this. If you figured out that a goblin was messing with your house and your things, what would you do? You gonna set up some goblin traps? You gonna stay up all night with a leather belt about to teach it a lesson? Let me know your style of retribution in the comments. I'll see you again real soon. Be sure to send me your scary work stories at eeriecast.com/submit. Follow and review Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so we can reach as many new fans as possible. And sign up for members-only content at eeriecast.com/plus to support us. Thank you. Now then, I've got to clock out. But don't worry, I'll be back soon for yet another late night shift.